Before India became one of the world's largest tea drinking nations, before roadside chai stalls, clay coolers, and morning routines were steeped in steam and stories, this tea, this chai that comforts millions today cost them their lives. Today's Tale to Psych takes you to the history of how India became a tea drinking nation. In the thick forests of Assam as early as the 12th century, the Singpo people gathered wild tea leaves, dried and toasted them, then stuffed them into bamboo canes, smoking them like one might preserve meat. When they wanted a cup of tea, they just slice open the bamboo and brew the essence. No ceremony, no porcelain, just tradition rooted in survival and spirit. But this wasn't tea as a word knows it, not yet at least. Centuries passed. In the late 1600s, in the bustling trade city of Surat, merchants began sipping Chinese tea to soothe stomach aches. English traveler John Ovington, in his Voyage to Surat, noted that Indian traders drank it with some hot spice, sugar candy, or even preserved lemons. It wasn't widespread as it wasn't cultural. It was very niche, very medicinal, reserved for the few who traded with the world. Tea remained a quiet undercurrent in India's vast culinary ocean until Britain got thirsty. By the 1830s, the British Empire was tea obsessed. 40 million pounds of tea a year and all of it from China. But with tensions rising between Britain and China, their tea trade soured. This was a time when Britain and China viewed each other as barbarians, but the British were so obsessed with tea by this time that they could no longer live without it. So when China cut them out, they turned towards India and discovered that the people of Assam already grew their own indigenous variety. And then the British did what colonizers often do. They expanded, they invaded, and they industrialized. Jungles were cleared, plantations were planted, and this is when resistance began. The Assamese people, wary of foreign hands on their land, refused to participate. So much so, with some even revolting. Attacks on British planters erupted, and in response, the colonial powers brought in migrant workers from another part of the country, of India only. Many of them lured, tricked, or trapped into indentured labor. Wages were so low that they pushed the workers into heavy debts. Working conditions were so pathetic that the workers were severely malnourished. Diseases like enteric fever, cholera, venereal diseases were at peak. Additionally, malaria, anemia, dysentery, and respiratory illnesses were also prevalent among the plantation workers due to inadequate health care. Historian Jayata Sharma, in her book entitled Empire's Garden, Assam and the Making of India, wrote that because of the woeful working conditions, plantations became restricted zones where outsiders were not permitted entry. Mortality rates were so shockingly high that some accounts suggested nearly half the workforce succumbed to diseases, exhaustion, or abuse. Despite all these incidents, Indian tea production exploded in the late 1800s and the bulk of it went abroad. The rest stayed in the drawing rooms of British officers and elite Indians who mimicked their colonizers. Steeped with precision, served with sugar and milk, often more British than the British. For many Indians, drinking tea was seen as a political act, either a submission or symbol of submission or an extension of class. By the 1880s, public sentiments were split. While some raved about its taste and benefits, others rejected it outright and entirely, disgusted by the exploitative nature behind the brew. In the early 1900s, an economic depression abroad left British tea companies with a surplus as people's purchasing power declined. With exports falling now, they looked to a new market, the Indian market. Advertisements began popping up, targeting urban middle and upper middle class families. Images of serene gardens and smiling workers masked the brutality of plantation life. Leaflets explained how to brew the tea the proper way, but we Indians always have our own way, and so we adapted, twisting the recipe, making it our own. So instead of steeping leaves, we boiled them in milk and water. Instead of fine leaves, we used dust tea, broken fragments, because it was stronger and it was cheaper. And into the pot went ginger, cardamom, cloves, cinnamon, aromatics that transformed the drink into something new, something bolder. And that is how chai came into existence. By the 1920s, tea stalls began popping up in Calcutta near colleges and neighborhoods where students, poets, and political dreamers would gather over hot cups and heated debates. These weren't just tea shops, they were the new addas, the new hubs of culture and revolution. Meanwhile, in Bombay and Delhi, the Parsis, Zoroastrian immigrants from Persia, built their own cafe culture. Creamy, oversteeped Irani chai served alongside buttery biscuits and keema pav. These Irani cafes became melting pots, welcoming everyone everywhere. By the 1930s, India was producing more tea than ever before. But then the Great Depression struck. Global demand plummeted. Tea exports tanked and no one was drinking tea anymore. So the empire turned its eyes inward. Because if they couldn't sell tea abroad, they could always sell it to all the Indians. So initial marketing targeting only the urban middle and upper middle class now expanded to target all the Indians. This was a full blown campaign cutting across caste, class, gender, and geography. Tea boards launched carvas. Traveling salesmen hawked tea from railway platforms, factory gates, dusty village squares. Live demonstrations showed curious crowd how to brew a perfect cup. Free samples were poured into eager hands. Taglines like tea boost productivity, teas healthy, hygienic, modern echoed the markets. Factory foremen were told their workers would perform better after a cup and were urged to introduce tea breaks. This way, tea was rebranded as fuel for the modern India. And it worked. Tea began displacing traditional non caffeinated drinks such as buttermilk and lemon water. The adaptation of marketing using psychology was so strong that they adapted to the growing Indian independence movement. So much so that when Mahatma Gandhi condemned its addictive hold, its exploitative roots, indentured labor, soul crushing wages, and British branding, and calling a strong tea a poison, urging Indians to reject imperial products, the marketeers pivoted to recasting tea as a Swadeshi drink. Out went the aristocratic English ladies from these ads, and in came hand drawn posters of Indians, draped in regional attire, proudly sipping tea from Kulhar's glasses and saucers. Taglines captioned in Bangla, Marathi, Tamil, Urdu, one nation, many languages, one drink, one trademark. So by 1947, tea had transformed from colonial commodity into a symbol of national identity. On the eve of independence, marketeers promoted tea as a unifying force and a symbol of newly independent nation. The old empire's plantations were slowly sold off to Indian owners, and the export model remained, but a growing share was finally staying home. Chai, once foreign, had been transformed through rebellion, psychological reinvention, and marketing strategies into a symbol of Indian identity and unity. Now, let's have a quick look at how we got psychologically and systematically looped into these steamy routine sips. In behavioral psychology, habits form through a loop: cue, craving, and reward, and Chai nailed all three. So, this is how it goes: the cue, fatigue; the craving, tea; the reward, warmth, energy, belonging. So, one sip of tea after a long shift wasn't just refreshment, it was a small emotional reset. Over the period of time, this loop became so ingrained, it didn't stay in factories or offices, it embedded itself into Indian culture. We tend to trust what feels like us, and marketeers knew this, so they dished British teacups for Kulhars. They dropped English ads for local dialects. Suddenly, tea wasn't foreign. It looked like us, it sounded like us, it smelled like us, it tasted like us. When something feels like home, we don't just accept it, we own it. We loved chai, but many Indians also knew about the cruelty behind plantations. Gandhiji spoke out against it for crying out loud, and yet we kept drinking it. This internal tension between values and behavior is what psychology calls cognitive dissonance. So, what did marketeers do? They rewrote the narrative. Tea became Swadeshi, so drinking it wasn't colonial, it wasn't exploitative, it was nationalism. And suddenly the dissonance softened, and the guilt that eroded us internally became our best friend. So we could now sip this tea with pride without questioning it. Pavlov's famous experiment showed how repeated cues can train the brain to expect a response. And that's the holy grail for marketeers, PRs, and anyone who trades in influence. Marketeers used this psychology, repeatedly announcing and associating tea to energy, focus, and functionality. Factory tea breaks weren't just about refreshment. This was a habit. It was conditioning. It was crafted over time to shape behavior. So much so that even the smell of chai became a trigger for alertness. In clinical psychology, schemas are mental frameworks. Like invisible filters we use to understand the world. And when something is repeated enough, like tea being shown as comforting, as energizing, respectable, it becomes more than familiar. Tea wasn't just a drink anymore, it became identity. It was it was warmth, it was respect, it was productivity, it was family. It formed a cultural schema so strong that we stopped thinking about why we drink it. It came to us naturally, we just did. It became one with us. So what happened between 1930s and 1950s wasn't just smart marketing, it was a psychological genius draped in exceptional marketing campaigns, adapting to the call of culture, nationalism, and independence, making chai a story, a stimulus, a symbol. So if you found this video informative, don't hesitate to show your support. Like it, share it, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Tale to Psych for more psychology backed content that makes a difference. See you in the next one.